Hello, and welcome to episode 129 of Pop Culturally Deprived, where each week we watch a movie I've never seen before, which is most of them, and talk about the good, the bad, and the hormonal hussies of society. This week we're going to be talking about But I'm a Cheerleader on your I Just Wasn't Meant to Be Butch podcast. I'm Mandy Kay, and you can find me on Twitter at Mandy Kay if you want to continue to marvel at all of the things I still haven't seen.
And I'm Matthew Vose. This week is the start of the 2019 Godalming Film Festival, so if you're listening in real time, follow me on Twitter for lots of updates and retweets about that, and if you can get to our little town in Surrey, come and join us. I'm on Twitter at Matthew Vose.
So I am so excited to introduce our guest this week. I have been keeping this a secret from everybody for months and months and months, and I'm just so excited. We are joined this week by Kristin Russo. Kristin is a writer and educator focusing on LGBTQ issues. She's co-founder of everyoneisgay.com and mykidisgay.com, and she literally wrote the book on helping parents support their gay children. This is a book for parents of gay kids. You may also know her as half of the amazing Buffering the Vampire Slayer podcast. And I know you're getting ready to launch a couple other podcasts. So welcome to the show, Kristin. Yay. Please tell us anything that I didn't say. And I'm so glad you're here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. It's very thematically appropriate, I think, that I be here today.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to, be as gay as I can be every day. So thank you for helping me, get a few extra points on this Saturday.
You're welcome.
And no, you covered it pretty much. The newest podcast I have coming down the pipeline is The Boiler Room, which is a My So-Called Life rewatch podcast, because I apparently just want to live in the 90s forever.
There is nothing wrong with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, speaking of which, Mandy, we have a film directly from that period. How come you've not seen But I'm a Cheerleader?
So this is really funny. I had actually never heard of it until I heard you talk about it, Kristin, on Buffering.
Spreading the gospel,
Yeah. And then after that episode, the first time you mentioned it, several of the folks in our little community also listened to Buffering. And so they all messaged me asking me, well, is that movie on your list? And I had, honest to God, never even heard of it, which I don't understand because I was a teenager in 1999. So I should have. This came out right around the same time as American Pie, which I did see. So I don't know. I'm baffled as to how I didn't know this movie existed.
It's interesting, though. Yeah, but because it's I don't know how widespread the advertisements and stuff was for the movie at the time. I had been out for 2 years, barely. So I was really, really finding and seeking out lots of gay stuff. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if I had not been doing that, if it would have been something on my radar, because the first time I saw it was at Two Boots Theater in New York City, which I don't know that it was playing in all the theaters in New York City, but I'm not sure. I didn't look that up.
Okay. Yeah, I think it probably didn't have a very wide theatrical release. I probably should know that since I read the Wikipedia page a couple times, but I don't. So
it's one of those things that I'm just this was a cornerstone of my young life, but also as a queer person, there are a lot of things that were cornerstones of my young life that a lot of people don't know because we were just on a different time travel over there.
Yeah. Well, for those folks who are like me and have never seen it before, when Megan's friends and family suspect she's a lesbian, they send her to homosexual rehab.
Goodness, it's dark.
Yeah. It is
dark comedy.
It is a dark comedy. Well, in concept, I think watching it doesn't feel like a dark comedy. But we can talk about that.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. But I'm a Cheerleader is a romantic comedy rooted in satire. It debuted at the 1999 Toronto International Film Festival and was released theatrically in 2000. Directed by Jamie Babbitt, it stars Natasha Lyonne and Clea Duvall, along with RuPaul, Melanie Linsky, Eddie Cibrian, and Rufio. Dante Basco. While the screenplay was written by Brian Wayne Peterson, the story was Babbitt's. It was inspired by an article she read about conversion therapy and some of her own personal familiarity with rehab programs. Her mother ran a halfway house called New Directions. Her goal was to explore the social construction of gender roles and heteronormativity.
So, Kristin, you said that you first saw it in New York. Do you now own this? Is this one you revisit regularly?
I don't own it, but that isn't really an indication of anything. I don't really own a lot of things. I actually had so much trouble renting it again from iTunes today because I must have rented it or purchased it or something a long time ago. And so my computer was like, what are you're trying to access something from several years ago. So I actually had to like sign into a different account and re-rent it.
No.
Yeah, but I've rewatched it definitely, probably maybe 2 or 3 times since I saw it initially, but I haven't rewatched it a bunch. But it is definitely for me one of the top classic films of like my queer journey by far.
Mandy, have you had lots of iTunes issues?
No, but I don't do stuff through iTunes. So this particular movie, I was delighted to find that it's actually available for free on the Vudu app or like on vudu.com. But because it's one of their free offerings, you do have to sit through a couple of commercials.
Aha.
Terrible.
So it was really bizarre. And they just like randomly put them in. And so it'd be like mid-scene, there's a commercial. But they actually did it really well, though, because every time there was a commercial, when it restarted like 5 or 10 seconds before it had cut so that you didn't actually lose context on anything.
Oh, neat.
Oh, there you go.
So for
Thanks,
something
Vudu.
free, it was great.
No, it's like Vudu's getting like a free ad, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. We are not affiliated with them in any way, by the way.
Other streaming services are available. Over here, even at the cinema, I think it got released in 2001 on a very limited release. I'd never seen this referenced on a streaming service. I ended up buying it off eBay.
Nice.
Wow. Yeah. Do you have the DVD?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like I really should have the DVD, you know, but I don't. The only DVDs I have right now are the box set of The L Word, and that's because I just did the first season of a podcast on them. And the music is completely different when you stream it than it is on the hard copy of the DVDs. But yeah, if I had a collection of DVDs, this would surely be one of them. There are a handful from the 90s that were pretty formative for me, and this really was like one of, if not the top one.
Nice.
Oh, then I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah.
About it.
Also, I think one of the first like queer rooted films that I saw after coming out was Boys Don't Cry. So like I really took a hard, this was like, oh, okay, so I can watch a movie and also like laugh and stuff
it
too.
can be
like,
fun.
I really, I thought, okay, so I'm queer and like we're gonna cry for all of the movies that we ever see. So it was a big difference for me to see those.
Right, so let's dig into the film a little bit. And Mandy, you mentioned a good big cast and a director who done a number of really good films. So Natasha Lyonne, Clea Duvall, and Jamie Babbitt. Have you seen their other work?
Jamie Babbitt, I had actually never heard of, but when I looked her up, I realized I have seen some of the television work that she's done. She's done some episodes of Gilmore Girls. She's done the recent Netflix show Russian Doll. I think, did she do The L Word? I haven't seen it, but I feel like I saw that referenced on her page.
I'm not sure, but she's a total badass. She's like sort of had her hands in many pies over the years. I think, and I'm pretty sure she's married to somebody named Kathy Dornetto, who's also a super badass writer and has done a lot of incredible work. So yeah, she's amazing and it shows.
Yeah, when I looked at the list, I was thinking it's a shame that particularly television directors, you just don't hear their names that often until you start doing a podcast where, every episode you mention who the director was and that sort of thing. And like just general life, we just take it for granted that TV show episodes are directed,
Totally. And I actually didn't know that the screenplay, I didn't know who the screenplay had been written by. And so I was just like looking a little further into it. And so it was nice to see that, this was her story, like that she didn't only direct it. She directed it and it was like her story that was being told. I think that also reads pretty clearly.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you look at the list of stuff she's done recently and it's Girls, Supergirl, Silicon Valley, The Orville, Marvelous Miss Maisel. She is working hard and doing good stuff. Love it. She did a film I watched earlier in the year called Addicted to Fresno, which is again Natasha Lyonne, and was really weird but really funny. very strange.
Yeah, I think that they work together a lot, actually. Natasha Lyonne and Jamie Babbitt. I feel like I see that, and also Clea Duvall. I think that, this probably was the first time they had worked together, but I think they're pretty intertwined out there in the world of Hollywood and work together on a lot of projects, whether it's like Natasha and Clea are in something together, or like Jamie's working on something and Natasha's in it. I see their names paired very often.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Natasha Lyonne, I was surprised at how little of the things on that list I have seen, because I'm just so familiar with who she is. Like, her face and her voice, just, they're normal. They're common to me. Like, I know who she is. I think I first became aware of her back in American Pie. And I know she's been a main cast member on Orange is the New Black. Yeah. But I really couldn't tell you anything else that she did. I just know her. Like, she's just there.
Have you seen Russian Doll?
I haven't. It's on my Netflix list.
So I actually haven't either, because it was so powerful that it like gave me an anxiety attack after the first episode. But I'm gonna go back to it. But it's like incredible. It was just like too much, and I was like, I'm not in a place where I can watch this whole series. But yeah, she's all over the place right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Clea Duvall, obviously, I first came to know her through Buffy. So I thought she was going to be the only Buffy reference that we had in this, but according to your notes, she is not, which is amazing.
Sinead.
Yeah. And then, I mean, Clea Duvall is just all over 90s teen movies, and then she was in The West Wing. She's a little bit like Natasha. She's everywhere, particularly back in the 90s, so...
Yeah, this was my introduction to both of them, actually. This was the first time that I had seen Natasha in anything, and the first time that I had ever met Clea Duvall. And obviously saw them and sort of like followed them because of this film. But this was my intro. And I think I saw somewhere in your notes, Mandy, that you were like, it's so weird to hear Natasha talking with like a higher voice and what have you. And I thought, oh, that's funny, right? Like, I sort of came to know her here. And so for me, I was like, whoa, who's this? Like, what's she doing now? Like, it was the opposite, like I had known her as Megan first.
Right. Oh, that makes so much sense. That's interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about all the things I've seen her in, and this is the only thing where I've seen her be that like perky teenage, like very, very feminine girl.
Right. Or like attempting to be a very feminine girl.
Right. And I think the thing that struck me the most about her was her voice, though, because she tried to pitch her voice higher for this role, unless she's pitching it lower for everything else that she's done since then.
No, I think this is less her real voice than we hear now. I think that what we hear now is probably how she actually talks. But I think that, again, like, I don't know, we'd have to ask Jamie or Natasha or somebody who is, heavily involved in the creation of the film. But I feel like part of the casting was that, right? Like, that this person is trying to be something that she's not,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even think of it like that, but absolutely. That's like a whole deeper level.
Yeah, like if there was a sequel, like, but I'm still a cheerleader, I feel like we would see Megan talking a little deeper.
Right. Okay.
And I want to shout out the writer of the story. So it was Jamie Babbitt's idea, and she got Brian Peterson to actually write the script and screenplay for it. He was writer, producer, exec producer, and showrunner eventually for most of Smallville's run.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
He's gay, too.
Yeah.
And also, I read somewhere that like Jamie had read a short story of his that was like really powerful to her, and that's what made her approach him to maybe write the screenplay.
Yes, he's another one who's doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
And that's my DC reference for the week. Similar material. I think certainly from this time, there's not much similar material. Certainly, like you say, Kristin, with this amount of heart and humour. Mandy, was there anything that this was reminding you of?
The only thing that I could come up with that had like a similar vibe was Saved, which we did on the show a couple weeks back. Just because it has that same like dark, humorous, satirical feel to it.
Is that Mandy Moore? Saved?
Yes.
Yeah, totally. I think it's like that camp, like it's heavily in the camp genre.
Yeah. Well, and it also, so I was talking to my boyfriend about this yesterday, and I was headcanoning it because a portion of Saved is the main character she gets pregnant because she's trying to save her boyfriend. So she sleeps with him because she's trying to save him from being gay, right? And they send him to a camp just like True Directions. And then we don't see him again until the end when they kind of like break from it. And so I was headcanoning it that this is that camp. And so this is what's happening to him that we're not seeing in Saved. Like they're all happening together.
I love that.
I'm really glad you made that pull because, yes, it is like this is the other side of that story. We saw Saved from the, very straight, very vanilla grouping. and now we're seeing it from the camp perspective. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. And then I looked, I Googled, some movies that are like, But I'm a Cheerleader. But of course, I am pop culturally deprived. I haven't seen any of those other ones.
What were the ones, like what came up as the references?
I think there's one. Is there a movie called Itty Bitty Titty Committee?
There is. I actually haven't seen that movie, but I know that title very well.
It's another Jamie Babbitt, I think.
Okay.
That's probably A, why I've heard the title, and B, why it came up as related.
And then, I don't know, there's other movies here that I just haven't heard of. Like, I Can't Think Straight, Better Than Chocolate.
Yeah, you're falling down a gay rabbit hole is what you're doing right there. They're like, you like But I'm a Cheerleader? Let's give you more gay content.
I need to diversify what I watch, so I'm good with that. Especially if they have amazing kissing scenes like we had between Natasha and Clea in this.
Oh my God, don't even get me started with the kissing scene, with the sex scene in this movie. We're going to get there, I know, but like, Jesus, gets me every time.
Yeah.
So I can kind of hear the smile, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Mandy, did you enjoy But I'm a Cheerleader?
I did. It was painful sometimes just because satire, for it to be effective, has to be so deeply rooted in reality, and so some of it was just painful, like recognizing, like, I know people who think like some of those people, and it's just horrifying, but it was such a good story, and it was done really, really well. Like, the performances were great, and yeah, it was good.
I don't know if there's any way of asking, did any of this speak to you? Was there something about this in the coming of age, in the being an outsider in the society, that particularly sort of evoked any reaction from you?
Oh, that's a good question that I didn't expect.
Sorry.
The best kind.
Yeah.
Because this isn't your experience, but yeah.
Right. I don't think I was looking at it from that perspective. Wow, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think like what you said too, though, it's like, right, all satire is rooted in reality. And so like at the beginning we were saying like, well, is it a dark comedy, or like maybe it's not a dark comedy, but like it is, just by the nature of it being satire. I think that all of this is rooted in,
right,
like the reason that the film is here is to kind of like underline how absolutely ludicrous this is. But the other side of that is that there's all of these people in the world who very much do not think it's ludicrous at all, which is, I think would affect anyone regardless of your identity. Certainly as like a queer person watching it, there are some touchstones in there that are different, but if you're on the other side of that divide and you're just like, how could anyone think this way? It just gets you.
Yeah, absolutely. From that perspective, that's why I say it was painful to watch. And I think watching at the end, the interactions between Megan and Graham that went reverse of how you expected them to go, when it's Graham is the one who's not actually being true to herself. She's still hiding. And Megan's the one who's saying, no, you have to leave with me. I struggled with that because part of me felt like I completely understood why Graham was doing that. And I felt like Megan should have been more understanding. And it hurt my heart for Graham. But at the same time, I'm so proud of Megan.
Right.
It kills me. And I don't know which answer is the right answer. And I don't think there is a right answer. I think you can feel both of those equally. It just, from the outside looking in, it hurts.
Well, I think that's such like such a big piece of sort of coming out, is that when not everybody is at the same pace as you are. And that's something that like I can understand now as somebody in my late 30s who's been out for 20 years. But certainly when I was a teenager coming out, like I didn't understand that. And so I think Megan's like we have to do this thing. This is the good and the right thing. Let's go. It's like once she gets there, she expects everybody to be there with her because she's just like wide-eyed, you know, like it's such a like a defining piece of her character is that like the minute that she sort of comes to understand what's good and what's right, she's there 100%. So I think it checks out big time that she's not like, let me give Graham space because like that's part of the process too. You definitely, I don't think, are there right out of the gates.
Right. I think the most relatable experience I have is I sometimes equate coming out as an atheist very similarly, which is something that I went through. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the things where I kind of went to the absolute furthest extreme once I admitted it to myself, you know, and then all of a sudden everything that I did was very intense, mm-hmm. I guess is the right word for it. It was very like purposeful and, well, I've admitted this, so I have to be a certain way. And I wanted nothing to do with how I was before.
Right.
And it felt kind of like that's a little bit of what Megan was experiencing.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, with anything, as you're like coming to understand yourself, usually the pendulum does swing like real far first. And then as you realize, I mean, you even see a little bit of that at the end when she's sort of like moving in with, what are their names? Larry and... I can't remember the other one's name, but
I don't remember either.
The two main guys who are sort of like the ex gays, like she moves in with them and is like, okay, so tell me, like, how do I be gay? And they're like, well, that's the thing is like, you just be you. Like, that's how, you know, but it takes a minute to kind of like recalibrate to, I don't need to change, you know, like I want to change the things about me that I've been kind of keeping down because I haven't come out yet and now I have, so I want to let those fly, and realizing what pieces you're just putting in there because you're like, well, I'm gay now, so I'm supposed to like do X, Y, and Z. Right. Larry and Lloyd, by the way. Larry and Lloyd are their names, and they're fantastic. I love them.
Yes, they were fantastic. Absolutely.
I was really surprised by the direction of the film, the style of the film in places. I thought this was going to be a coming-of-age story. Her realizing she was gay, coming out, coming to accept it. And
big surprise for you.
Yeah, I was really surprised in the beginning that she herself didn't believe it. And I thought they might do an interesting story of she's not gay, but everyone is making her think she should be. And something along those lines, which could be an interesting way. Yeah, exactly. They did cover some of it, but then it turns into a romance, just a romance in the bizarrest situation. And it was right. Yeah, it's like a romance inside of a commentary on conversion therapy, which is pretty badass. I think this movie rules. It's, you know, we have a long list of like queer movies from the 90s that came out, and like lesbian movies specifically, and a lot of them were not good. You know, we watched them because it's like, you know, if you get something and there's a lesbian in it and you're a lesbian, you're like, I got to consume this media. But, you know, a lot of the films that I was watching at the time were like not quality films. And this is one that stands, like kind of towers over a lot of the others in the quality of the creation of the film and the dialogue and all of it. Yeah. And I also feel like there's a lot of films doing some of this similar kind of story about self-image, being yourself, the coming-of-age stories coupled with some romance that are coming out very recently. So I don't know if this was an absolute trendsetter, if it's that the filmmakers watched this and like you say, other films at the time, who are now like, oh, now I'm going to make Love, Simon, Freak Show, what was it, Call Me By Your Name? Really good modern gay film. So but hopefully more accepting, getting more publicity, because like we said, this had a very limited release.
Right. It's weird, though. It's like a film that had a limited release, but it's also a film that, like, I don't know a single person of my generation or even kind of in the surrounding generations who identifies as queer in, like, any way who has not seen this movie. So I do feel like it's very well known.
I'm worried we're calling someone out for not having seen it. It's okay if you haven't seen it.
No, if you haven't seen it, just come on over to the other side. You know, that's what this is for.
Let's have a party next weekend. Big screening.
Yeah.
So I have a question. You know, we talked, this is absolutely a dark comedy because of the way, you know, it's a satire. It kind of has to be. But does it at all, is there any concern that this is too lighthearted for the subject matter that we're talking about? Because it does kind of show conversion therapy in a silly light rather than what's the word that I'm looking for? The reality that we really should be like fighting against.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, I haven't spoken to Jamie to ask her the audience she was making this for, but I feel like she was making it for us.
Right, okay.
And like, you know, like, it's very apparent that this movie was not made to take somebody who believes in conversion therapy and change their mind, right? It's
right.
like, this movie is made for a generation of people who grew up very close to a time where conversion therapy was super normal, and during a time when conversion therapy was still super actively happening, to be like, hey, isn't this so fucked up? Like, this is so fucked up and ridiculous. Like, let's laugh at how insane this is. And like, to me, and again, like I watched it when it came out when I was 19. I watched it, you know, today as a 38-year-old, and I have very similar feelings in that vein. It's just like, you know, we all know, like, we live with the reality that this happened in a variety of like very extreme ways. If we're going back as far as like, you know, the 40s and 50s and stuff, like, I mean, the things that happened were atrocious. And so I think that a film like this, and satire in general, right? Like, that's kind of the core purpose of satire, is to say, like, this awful thing is happening. We need to laugh at something, you know, like, we need to like be able to laugh, and we need to be able to like find commonality in the experience in a way that's not always just looking right at the starkness and the darkness of it. And so I think that was more her intentionality, was to make fun of it, you know, like, you know, as dangerous and as scary and terrifying and awful and all the things that it is ridiculous when you really peel back the layers of why these things are happening. It is absurd. It's completely absurd.
Right.
And I think that that's what this movie is aiming at, and I think it nails it. So I personally do not think that it's too light of a take on it, because I think that it's satirical and it's intended to be that way. And I think it's for the, you know, mostly for queer community, and for like people who are maybe not in queer community, but who are like very much rolling their eyes at anyone who's like, girls should wear dresses and boys should wear pants. Like, are we kidding? Yeah.
Oh, gosh, some of that stuff just killed me. Like, the whole idea of gender roles. And gosh, there was this line. Let me go back to my notes and see if I can find it really quick. There was a line that was basically like, if you understand gender roles, then you can stop objectifying women.
Yes.
Said to the women.
I wrote that down too.
And I'm like, but the whole point of the male gender role is to objectify women. So what kind of sense does this make right now?
I know. There are so many little pieces of dialogue that are just like razor sharp, just like incredible. You could take them one line like that and talk about it for a half hour, because it's just like, yep, exactly. And isn't that the point? And I think, you know, to talk about the set and the costuming in this, like that the satire, of course, is there in like the dialogue and the characters and like the way they relate to each other, But every time I watch this movie, I am floored all over again by the beauty of the set and the colors used in the set. And the costumes are so remarkable that this time I was like, who the hell was the costume designer? Like, I need to look this person up. Like, are they still making it? Is this what they do still? Because I feel like it's brilliant. And I looked the costume designer up, and her name is Alex Friedberg. She's no big deal, been nominated for 6 Emmys. She won an Emmy. She's the costume designer for Big Little Lies. She was like a total badass. So like our analysis that the costuming in this is incredible is spot on. It was done by a total badass costume designer.
Yeah. Every person who worked on this movie, I think, is a total badass at what they do.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So I was really struck by the sets and how everything was pink and blue. And of course, that fits into the whole trying to define gender roles, which obviously we know is bullshit. But I found this quote by Babbitt that made such perfect sense. She said, "I wanted to make the world of the movie very artificial and polyester." I think it's a great comment on the artificiality of gender identity. And
that's nice.
Yeah, I don't think, like, my brain, when I'm watching a movie, particularly for the first time, like, I don't catch stuff like that. Like, I recognize that it was there, and I recognize the absurdity of those like vinyl dresses and suits at graduation. But I didn't.
They're so beautiful.
Yeah, but my brain didn't connect artificial to what they were actually portraying, and to see it. Like, I think if I had watched it a couple more times, I would have gotten there. But it's subtle in a way that's not subtle, and it's just fantastic.
I like totally want to challenge you on that, because I think that even though you might not have like been able, like, even though you might not have like had the conscious thought of what was happening, I feel like it probably got into your head the exact way that Jamie wanted it to. You know what I mean? Like, even if you weren't like, oh, of course they're like using patent leather to like symbolize the artificiality of gender identity. It's like the awareness of the absurdity of it is kind of the point, and that it's like underlined by the patent leather and like the shininess. And that was the scene that made me look up the costume designer, because I was just like, who the hell did this? This is so beautiful. I mean, the blue patent leather suits and the pink patent leather, I don't know if it's patent leather, but whatever the material is that's like shiny like patent leather. And then like all of the parents and the teachers being in like white, like muted whites. It's just gorgeous to look at.
Yeah, it definitely was. Absolutely. I was continually impressed by like everything that was on the screen. Did you notice, here's a kind of another costuming question, in the scene where they snuck out and we got to see everybody for the first time in their street clothes?
I have a lot to say about that too.
Megan's the only one who was still wearing pink. Did you notice that?
Oh, I didn't, but that's nice. That's a nice touch.
And so I was trying to figure out if that's still... Of course it was intentional, because you don't do anything in a movie that's not intentional. Yeah. But is that her still trying so hard to be this person that she thinks she is instead of this person? Yeah, maybe.
Because the first thing she says, right, is like, you didn't say you were taking me to a gay bar, right? She's like not there yet in that first scene.
Right.
At all. So I think that costuming, though I didn't notice it, makes total sense. I also can tell you why I didn't notice it, and it's because Clea Duvall was wearing a black button-up shirt, and the first time that I saw them, I mean, like, Clea Duvall is somebody who, and I've had this conversation with several other queer people my age, like, this role and this movie and Clea Duvall were like, you want to talk about a root? Like, that, it was like so formative. And so like this scene, there's like the like image of her like on the bed smoking a cigarette right when Megan walks in. The moment that she puts on her clothes for the first time and you see her in that button up, like there are just these like little flash images that for my 19-year-old brain were like, what the fuck is happening? So I'm sure I've never noticed Natasha Lyonne being in pink, because I am always just like taken back to the root of like, oh my God, Clea Duvall in a black button-up shirt, help me.
Right. And totally understandable. Absolutely. Yeah. There were a couple swoon-worthy scenes in this movie for sure, but I think I just noticed it because it was such a stark contrast to everybody else was wearing black, and then she's got this pink sweater on.
Yeah.
So, but I totally understand keeping your focus on Clea Duvall. I
had to, But also, like, I feel like that little moment, that like attention to detail there is present throughout the whole movie. Even the like, I also think that budget is so powerful. Like, I don't know what their budget was, but I'm going to imagine it wasn't super high. And I love what happens when movies don't have these like massive budgets, because I think the most creative, brilliant things can happen. And so like when you're talking about the specificity of the choice of that sweater, it makes me think of like all of the work that whomever did on those cutouts that are used in the boys scene, where they're like the army men, but it like looks like somebody's giving somebody else a blowjob, and like, like just these like the way that the sparkles are like placed around things in those cutouts. Everything is so intentional, so specific, and so like obviously done by hand, which gives it a very powerful effect too, I think.
Yeah. I just looked it up. It had a budget of $1 million.
Yeah, so not
very much.
Not a big budget to get a movie like this off the ground, and certainly not to get a movie looking as like beautiful as this movie looks.
Yeah.
But we've talked previously about how sometimes like not quite having the budget helps you. It forces you to make considerations or use light and dark and things. I was quite struck all the time they were filming on the camp. All the cameras are static. And there's a few times, particularly when they're all seated on the sofa and it's like over people's head, the camera is in position and people walk into the scene and into the frame and onto their spot. Like it's,
right.
They've set up the camera shot and they have no opportunity to move it. But then once they do go to the bar and other locations, it's sometimes more handheld. The cameras are moving. It feels organic and natural. compared to this really rigid, slightly awkward shooting they do in the camp. And it probably is pure budget on, we have no room for cameras in this set, so we just have to set them up on a table and leave them there.
It's like, it's like budget with intentionality, right? Like, you have a limit, so how are you going to like make that limit work for you, basically? And I think they do that everywhere. I mean, I don't know if we're like ready to talk about it yet, but the scene where they sleep together or whatever is literally like it looks like it was shot with like a flashlight, like it's gorgeous. It is, I think, a scene that will make me want to weep every time I watch it. And I think that's because of the beauty of the scene. And also because I saw it when I was 19 and like pretty newly gay. And it was just like, what am I watching? You also don't expect it because you've been like in this satire comedy. And then you're like, whoa, this shit is real.
Right,
but that, like, to tie it to the budget piece, it's like, I'm sure a lot of the choices were made there to keep it within budget, and the way that they chose to use the limited budget wound up making it stunning.
Yeah, and all of those sequences where it's the two of them together, it feels intimate, it feels nice and natural. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, my thought that I wrote down for that was these scenes with Clea and Natasha are amazing and the only non-absurd thing in this whole movie.
Yeah.
And yeah, it gave me feels.
And isn't that like another that kind of underlines what you were saying before? It's like, to take the core of their love for each other and make it the only thing that is not satirical is making a pretty big statement.
Yeah. Yeah. It just made me smile, I have to tell you. I'm really glad that you agreed to come on and talk about this movie because it means I had to watch it, and I'm really glad I watched it now.
You can always trust me, I won't lead you astray. This movie, I mean, this movie is powerful on so many levels, and it's just like I forget every time how incredible the cast is. It's like I was like, Michelle Williams, I forgot you were even here. Like I didn't even like RuPaul, Melanie Linsky, like just like such an incredible cast of people and all together. And I'm sure that most of them did this work for very little money,
Right.
And it's powerful and rad. I mean, Kathy Moriarty, I think that's how you say her last name, but who plays the like head bitch in charge, basically, of the camp, is one of my favorite characters of all time. I think she's just perfect. She reminds me of like some of my like Long Island aunts who have smoked for years and years, just like yapping very loudly and being pissed off and like fucking cleaning her plastic flowers. Like the choices that they made these characters get are so perfect.
All right. Well, we are veering into gushing territory. Is there anything that you want to talk about before we start talking about just like our favorite scenes, lines, moments?
Oh, I mean, I could talk about anything forever with this, but no, I mean, I'm down to get into favorites because I'm sure that will bring up a lot.
Okay. Well, since this is one of your favorite movies, do you just want to go through? I mean, you can't say the whole movie, but are there specific things that you really want to pull out and talk about as being just amazing?
Yeah, I mean, I already gushed about Kathy Moriarty's role, and I think the first thing that she says when Megan arrives is like, she's 17. It's a good thing you got her here. We almost lost her to college. Like It's just like these little lines that are like, like you see where they're tied to. So I love the whole setup of the camp, that like she has this incredibly like flamboyant son who's just like always with some kind of chainsaw or broom handle or whatever it is, just like being so sexy. And if he's not doing that, he's like walking outside with a curly straw. It's just like all of the details in that whole dynamic are set up wonderfully. RuPaul, I mean, we probably should spend a little time just talking about RuPaul and how brilliant he is in this this movie. And just like, this is like, earlier on and like a time when he was appearing a lot in films like this. And I don't know, I just think his performance is brilliant.
It's really strange coming to it off the back of watching a lot of Drag Race in recent weeks. Right. And just, you can see bits of it in there, and every so often there's a quirk or a mannerism. You're like, oh, I see it. But the performance of RuPaul, it's buried compared to when he's in drag. And it's
right. And this is like similar for me with like Natasha. It's like, this was how I first met RuPaul, and certainly RuPaul was doing maybe not this movie, but like I can't think of the other things that he was in at the time. But I know that he was in like a handful of things that I had seen and what have you. And also I'm pretty sure, again, I haven't fact checked this, so hopefully I'm not misspeaking, but was definitely doing drag and like was, we knew who RuPaul was past just like acting in this part in this movie. But for me, coming to understand RuPaul, it was actually both pieces of like the drag and also him playing, gay characters in films and what have you. So it's not, but I imagine, right, if you're going backwards now, it's like, oh, wow.
Yeah. And it is a good performance. Even over and above that, you'd say it's a very interesting character.
Oh my God. His like one of his first lines, like, I myself was once a gay. And the whole cast is incredible, but RuPaul, of course. And also, I didn't write down the actor's name who plays Andre, but I also think that his performance is incredible. And he was one of my favorite characters in my first watching of the movie. I just loved him.
The chap is called Douglas Spain.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I don't know his other work, but I think he's done other TV shows and movies and what have you, but I thought he was phenomenal. And then, the classic things like the scene that comes to my mind the most when I think of this movie is, of course, where she's, maybe not of course, but where she's sitting in the chair and she's saying, I'm a homosexual. And she's crying and then she's like drooling and her face, it's just like one of the more brilliant performances by Natasha Lyonne of all time. And certainly in the context of this movie, I think it's like one of the classic scenes of her sort of like owning it and realizing it and just like losing it as she does. So I love that. And then I have a whole list here. Clea Duvall and her cigarette, Clea Duvall and her button down, Clea Duvall and her smile, et cetera, et cetera. I love Butch Jan. I think that character, having been going through the first season of The L Word with To Ellen back and just like revisiting my early stages of understanding of like gender and sexuality, I find these little touchstones of characters and moments that taught me the sort of expanded view of gender and sexuality. Because when I first came to like understanding myself as somebody who was gay, I didn't really understand the flexibility there. I definitely thought that like gender presentation was attached to sexuality and what have you. And so the fact that this character exists, and is like super masculine presenting, I call her Butch Jan. I just finished reading Stone Butch Blues, which is a devastatingly important read that everybody should read. It's just, I won't go on about it here, but there's a character in it whose name is Butch Jan. And I was like, I wonder if they pulled Butch Jan from Stone Butch Blues. But anyhow, I love that her whole arc is sort of like, hey, actually, like my gender presentation doesn't like match the way you want it to match, but I actually am like super into dudes. So I'm going to go.
Yeah.
That was really like, it's hilarious. And it was really important even for me as like a young queer person at that time to be like, right. Gender and sexuality are not inextricably linked.
Yeah, that's definitely growing up the way that I did. So I actually don't know that I explained this to you. One of the reasons why I am pop culturally deprived is because I grew up in a very conservative kind of fundamentalist house. So I didn't get to watch a lot of things. So I grew up in a house that definitely prescribed to the same gender roles that they're presenting in the movie as fact. I grew up in that. And so I probably around the time that this movie came out, or maybe, a few years before that, I would have seen Jan and expected her to have a sexuality that lined up with her outward appearance because I wouldn't have known any better.
Totally.
And so at the time, I think, had I seen this in 1999, I think it would have been like mind-blowing for me. I think I would have enjoyed it, but I think it would have blown my mind. Absolutely.
Yeah. Totally. And like I didn't grow up in a house that like had super rigid gender roles, though. I mean, I grew up Catholic and there's like a whole bunch of shit in there. But even for me as a person who had been out, who had just moved to New York City, who had a girlfriend, it was still mind-blowing for me at that time. Because, you know, it's like there's a lot to unlearn. And you know, I think all of us still fall into those patterns now. You know, I mean, I've been out for 20 years and doing work in queer communities for 10, and definitely still can catch myself making assumptions about people based on their appearance, their physicality, what have you, you know, and like I'm lucky enough to have undone a lot of those underpinning things, so that I can check myself when that happens. But it goes deep. Those like those ties really do go very deep for all of us.
Absolutely. And on top of that, I'm also from North Carolina, so I'm dealing with the southernness as well.
Yeah,
it's just layered. It's great.
Yeah. Also, I just want to talk about the song that plays during the sex scene. Like, I talked about the lighting and how I think it's like, you know, probably up there. If I had to make like a top 10 list of queer sex scenes, this would definitely be on it. And I think part of that is the visuals. But then also, I'm sorry, but the lyrics to this song are breathe into my hands or cup them like a glass to drink from. Like, and then it's just, are you still breathing over and over again? It is A, the most 90s song I've ever heard in my entire life. And B, the lyrics are gutting and beautiful. Like, it's like stupid how beautiful they are. I tweeted about it like right before we started taping because I was like, I can't contain this. I have to share it with the world.
Yeah, I remember thinking when I was hearing it, I was like, wow, this song is beautiful. And it's so perfect here in this scene. And I was contrasting it to the song they were dancing to at the club.
Right.
Because that song, everybody was slow dancing to it, and it was not a slow dance kind of song. But the words of that one, and I cannot remember what they were right now, but they were so on point, like almost too on the nose.
Oh, I don't remember.
For what they
I
were
wish
dealing with.
with.
I don't think I wrote it down. Terrible. I wish I had, because I just remember thinking that is, my notes were, this is not really a slow dance kind of song, but it's definitely on point for lyrics. So that's not super helpful.
I can't. I just watched it, but I think I got just bowled over by the cupping hands like a glass to drink from. I forgot all the other music. Oh, you know what? I did write down a note about another song somewhere because it was a song that really stuck with me. Like when it started playing, I was like, oh, right. Which this is not the song that played at the bar, but the other song that is like really rooted for me in this movie and like feelings is the song that plays when they're doing like the final test, and it's sort of like this montage scene. I think that's when it happens, but it's sort of like you see Megan and Graham like through the testing, like getting closer and closer and closer and laughing. And it's this song by a band that was apparently a short-lived band in the 90s called Ghost Sailor. And it's the one that's like, she's a ray of sunshine, my only ray of sunshine, which is just, again, like not about as 90s as 90s can be.
Right.
Music.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the track listing of the songs, and I think the song I'm talking about is called If You Should Try and Kiss Her.
Oh, that does sound on the nose.
Yeah, that's the one that, looking at these titles, I'm pretty sure that's probably what it was. Just because that was when it was super clear there's a crush happening here. Like, this is gonna be a thing now, and I was here for it. It's great.
I do love that the track listing has a RuPaul track on there, and it is one of the songs in the film. It's
so amazing. I didn't realize
it's that sort of brazenness that I do love about the Drag Race as well. It's like, you're going to help RuPaul film a new video. You're going to lip sync to her song. You're going to.
RuPaul also knows how to work a budget, you know?
Right?
I'm going to get the most out of this possible.
You're going to go to the Absolute Vodka Bar. Are you indeed? Okay. Right, Mandy, you've mentioned the kissing scene a couple of times. This is your opportunity to tell us quite why it gave you such big heart eyes.
I mean, have you seen it?
I have.
How can you see that scene and not just have your heart go all aflutter?
Grew 3 sizes that day.
I mean, yeah, it was, I think, because there were a lot of things happening. One, it was just, we had already seen Megan's experience kissing a dude.
Oh my God.
That dude did not do it right, let me just say. Poor Megan.
Have you all seen Pen 15 at all?
No.
Because I just watched the whole series in like one sitting, which you will too if you started. It's phenomenal. And it's basically a high school or middle school, rather, set show in the early 2000s. Anyhow, there's a kissing scene in that show that is really pulled right from this one. It's the same deal. And you're just like, oh, God. He's licking her face.
I was just thinking, like, poor Megan has never had a real, like, actual kiss. Like, she doesn't know what kissing is supposed to be like. Yeah. And then she gets to experience this with Graham. And it was sweet. And it had, like, a sense of innocence about it. And it was just beautiful. And
also, oh, sorry. Yes, please keep talking about this.
No, it's just, I loved it. Absolutely. Like, I was sitting there kind of thinking, I wish I was getting kissed like that by Clea Duvall.
See, that's how we trick you. There you go.
So, yeah, no, that is hands down my favorite scene. I mean, the sex scene was great too. But I think just because that first kissing scene was really Megan's kind of awakening. Mm-hmm. Like, she had already admitted it. You know, she had already said, well, I don't think these feelings are unnatural. And she had owned it. Right. But she hadn't really internalized it, I think, until this scene when she got jealous and then they kissed. And just watching it play out, I loved.
And I think this is a common experience, right? Of like, you can't admit to yourself the way you're feeling until all of a sudden somebody else is like moving in on that person. And then suddenly you can't justify. Like, there's no way to justify the anger or the jealousy unless you look right at the feelings you have. And so as much as like I agree there's like an innocence and like sweetness to the kiss, I also think that there's a sense of urgency to it, which is why it's really powerful too. It's like, you know, I mean, Graham is like screaming. They're screaming at each other, you know? She's like, you want me to do what I want, what I really want? And Megan is like, screw you. And in the middle of like screaming at her, Graham kisses her. So like, and it winds up being super sweet and what have you, but it does come from this place of like fighting against it, and finally giving into it, which is like, you know, there's a lot of powerful shit about being queer, and like that moment is one of the really amazing ones where, you know, you're just like, holy shit, I'm doing this thing. Like, I'm actually doing this thing that I've thought about doing for so long, and I don't know how I feel about it, but it's happening.
It's deep. It's heavy.
Yeah. She also says there's a moment in the beginning of the movie where Michelle Williams' character is like, you know, you don't like, you know, why don't you like kissing him or whatever? And Megan is like, well, maybe he's just not doing it right. And it's like, actually, that is correct. Like, we cannot determine your sexuality based on you not liking your boyfriend's kiss, because it is the worst thing anyone has ever witnessed.
Like, I had so much secondhand embarrassment watching it. This is just awful. Yeah, awful. So, the other thing that really, really stood out to me, it was when they were trying to get Megan to admit that she's a homosexual, and you know, it was like, but I haven't had sex with my boyfriend yet. And the other girl, I think it was Melanie's character, she said, it's really easy to be a prude when you're not attracted to him, isn't it? And I was like, oh my God, that's so spot on. But so hilarious.
They gave you like a lot of characters who had varying levels of self-awareness about being queer, to contrast like Megan's total unawareness. You know, a lot of them really just like toyed with her, because they were all like very aware that they were queer and very aware that they were going to be queer well after leaving this camp.
Right. Just going through the motions to get out.
Yeah.
What about you, Matthew? I know Kristin and I have really been gushing and not giving you a ton of time to talk. So did you have some really moments that stood out to you?
Other than all the things you've said, because there is a lot of good in here. We've not really touched on the boys, and they are very much there for comic relief. You know, they're doing some of the story stuff and showing how ridiculous this is, but there's a really nice spectrum of characters in there who are sort of doing camp or queer or gay or butch in very different ways. I think there were some people saying it was all very stereotypical, but this is actually showing there is a something of a spectrum here, which is really nice. But I did quite enjoy it. I'm sure there's a moment where they are threatened with the punishment of watching sports, And no one wants that.
Well, and that was really funny too, because it's like most of them don't, but then you have like Dolph, right, who is a wrestler, and it's like so it's like it's like funny on the head of like the stereotypical joke of like gay guys don't like sports, and then undone immediately too, because it's like, well, one of these dudes is straight up a wrestler, like
right.
He would probably like watching sports and want to watch sports. But yeah, I agree. I think the variety in both the boys and the girls is really amazing. And like, you know, I think you would see that now. And this was 99. And I don't know that would have been the case if you had straight people making this movie. I don't know that would have been as nuanced. But you didn't, you know, you had two queer people. I'm sure not just two queer people, but like, you know, speaking of Jamie and the, I don't know the name of the dude who, like the two of them are both coming to it with an experience of being gay or queer, or however they identify. And so know enough to upend those things that sure, of course, the stereotypes are stereotypes. Like a lot of the, you know, the cliches, the stereotypes are there because that's true. It's like, you know, definitely I've had a lot of flannel shirts in my life that, you know, I cannot deny it. But obviously that's not the case for everybody. And within that is nuance. And I think even with it being satirical, we get to see that here.
Yeah, it's just a lot of fun all the way through. And I think that fun sort of robs the power from Mandy, just going back to your question earlier about the, you know, should it actually be as lighthearted as this? It does take away some of that, scariness is not the right word, but it says this is bloody ridiculous. And that's good. It's the sort of attitude that should be taken. Say, look, we should laugh at this thing and try to resign it to history.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, you know, as much as we're laughing at it too, like if you really look into the themes there, you have a bunch of queer young people banding together to protect each other and lift each other up. You have queer people or gay people or what have you who went through this camp, knew it was wrong, and who live nearby and quite literally, like, you know, guerrilla style throw you know, who quite literally like go in underground and are like giving them flyers and showing them things, you know, to read and taking them to bars, not because they want them to drink alcohol, but because they want them to see that there's community and that there is a way for them to be who they are and what have you. So it's like, right, it's satirical, but also the like kind of nuggets that we need to survive are also all spelled out for us in the way that the movie is made.
Great. Love it.
So there's one scene that we haven't talked about yet, and I'm not really sure that there is anything to say about it other than it was horrible. But when the head lady, I can't think of her name, she makes them go with the signs and protest in front of Larry and Lloyd's house.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're
Sorry,
shouting
I thought you were
and
talk about the scene where they're forced to simulate sex, which is
God,
also
no, I
a
tried
horrible,
to block that out. I tried to block that one out. We should probably talk about that too.
Horrible scene. But yeah, both of those scenes are pretty rough to get through. I actually have a worse time with the sex simulation like final thing. I mean, it's there to like underline how fucking ridiculous it is, but it's upsetting. But yeah, sorry, to the signs.
Yeah, I think that scene broke my heart just a little bit because she's making them shout these horrible things that are about themselves. You know, and it hurt to watch it. And then to see Megan, like they had this shot where everybody else goes and gets back on the bus and they drop their signs and she's still standing there by herself holding her sign.
Right. Which is a gorgeous image.
It is a gorgeous image, and everything that they did in this movie was intentional, like you've said, and it speaks so much to fighting against your nature and like punishing yourself for who you are, and also the fact that like this is a truth too, right? That how many people who are marching against, you know, LGBTQ equality are actually like repressing something inside of themselves so much that it turns into hatred. Like obviously we're not seeing that precisely here because they're being forced to do it. But like I think there is a commentary there on that too, that when you do deny a part of yourself enough, you hate people who are not denying
that part of themselves, right? Because you don't get to live it and they do.
Right.
And it's not like tangible for you like that. But I do think that there's a lot of that in that scene too.
You're a very generous person, I think.
Also, listen, we can talk about the science scene more too, but I want to make sure that we are going to talk about her cheer, Megan's cheer, because that is also a thing that can make me sob my eyes out at the end of the movie. She sort of comes back to get Graham, and like to make it all the more powerful, like Graham has said to her, like in that scene where they're sleeping together, you know, I want to see you cheer. And Megan is so embarrassed and is like, stop making fun. Like, don't make fun of me. And she's like, no, seriously. Like, I want to see you cheer. And it's this like really powerful moment because it's like, listen, I know I made fun of cheerleaders, but like, actually you mean something to me and this means something to you. And so therefore I would like to see this thing and like look at it a different way. And then for her to make the decision that like the last thing she's going to do to try to get Graham is to do this cheer, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. I won't take no anymore. 5, 6, 7, 8. I want you to be my mate. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're the one I adore. 5, 6, 7, 8. Don't run from me because this is fate. Murder me.
Yeah.
Murder me. Like, it's the cutest, sweetest, gentlest, most innocent thing on the face of the planet. And it kills me. It kills me.
Yeah, it was. I was right there with you. I was struggling a little bit still with the idea of she's trying to push Graham into something Graham's not ready for. But I love grand gestures and the grand scheme of a romance. That's exactly what you want. And it was so sweet and brave, and it melted my little heart.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah. Every time I see it, it melts my heart.
Yeah. All right. So before we wrap up, let's talk about that scene that we have avoided, that I like blocked out until you reminded me of it.
Oh no.
Like I honestly, so I had picked up throughout the movie that they had talked about there was going to be a simulation, and I could not for the life of me figure out what it was going to be. Mm-hmm. I never imagined it was going to be simulating sex. Like heterosexual sex. Like that completely came out of left field for me. It probably shouldn't have, given the nature of the movie, but I was like, did they really go there?
Yeah, like I get why it came out of left field, and this is something I would like love to learn more about the decision making on this as the final step, because I do think it comes out of left field in the sense that we are allowed to just laugh at most of the other steps, right? It's like, ha, 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 they're like putting a wedding dress on, or like, ha, ha, look at those boys chopping wood, or, you know, like it's not funny because it is sort of illustrating a larger thing about our world that's totally not funny at all. It's really fucked up, but it like you're really just allowed to laugh and laugh only for the most part. And then when we get to step 5, you're not allowed to just laugh anymore. Like it's like, I mean, this is like an abusive thing to do to anybody. It's totally, you know, obviously non-consensual. It's just really upsetting. And you know, there's an element of course, like laughing because they're in these like ridiculous nude, like Adam and Eve literal suits with like leaves and flowers on them, and it's ridiculous. But it is. It's like definitely more like violent than any of the other steps. So I think it makes sense that you were like, what the hell? And I have to imagine that there was an intentionality behind that too. I don't even know how I feel about it, but I definitely would think that decision was made consciously. Mm-hmm. Because it is violent, right? Like what happens in conversion therapy is incredibly violent,
right?
Even if it's
absolutely.
not like this. So I don't know. Again, maybe I'm being too generous with like this and what have you, but it upsets me more like the older I am when I watch it, and like the more that I am aware of stuff, the more that it upsets me.
Yeah. It had a very different tone from the rest of the movie. Mm-hmm. I feel like they tried to keep it campy because of the outfits and her sitting there with the megaphone directing them and that sort of thing. But like what was happening was just, I mean, it was not okay. I mean, nothing in this movie that happened was okay, but this...
Right. And like, but isn't that, like, I haven't really unpacked this that much. Like, I'm kind of unpacking it live right here. But isn't that, like, the point that like it is like no matter what stage of this you're at, like basically this is what you're doing to somebody, you know, like you're violating them at every stage. And like, yes, this is the biggest piece of the violation. But I think that because of this scene, like you don't get to watch the movie and only laugh at the idea of it, right?
Right.
So
Okay,
again, I'm not sure. I haven't unpacked it a bunch, but I definitely find it to be upsetting as well.
Yeah, I think I definitely want to rewatch this movie. Because the first time you watch a movie, you don't know what you're getting into, and so you don't really know the right frame of mind that you need to have to experience it. So after, especially if you're talking about it with you, and hearing just like your passion about it and all of that stuff, I think I really want to rewatch it and kind of see if I feel any differently, or if I can, I'm not sure the word that I'm looking for, make some connections that I missed the first time.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, with any good movie, right? Like the second time through or the third time through, you're like, oh.
Yeah. That's what they tell me, especially when there are movies that I didn't like. They're like, no, but you have to watch it again.
Sometimes too, though, like, you know, movies get into our minds, I think, at different stages of time, and they become, you know, just like little touchstones for us. And then it's hard to bring somebody into it later. You know, like I do think that that's real too. It's like, I'm sure there are some movies that mean a lot to me that I wouldn't be able to get to translate for somebody else, because the reason that they're so important to me is because of the experience I had with them at the time, and then like watching them over and over again. And so I get that. I get that.
Yeah, we've run into that several times on this show, particularly with older movies that just didn't age well. But people still love them because of sentimentality and nostalgia and, like you said, where they were at the time they first saw it.
Right.
It matters. Absolutely.
I want to tell everybody, because I mentioned Sinead up at the top as somebody who is on Buffy. So just in case you're like wondering, Sinead is played, we haven't even talked about Sinead, by the way, who loves pain and is a homosexual. But Sinead is played by Catherine Townsend, who played Sunday in The Freshman, the season 4 premiere episode of Buffy. Sunday was like the like badass blonde vampire who was like leading the pack of vampires. And you know, I'm into basically, I think, every character Catherine Townsend plays. I don't know. I only know these two, I think, but she's been in a bunch of stuff. And I love both Sunday and Sinead very deeply.
Yeah. So the whole time I was watching this movie, every time Sinead came on screen, I was like, she looks so familiar and I cannot place her. And then I read your note and the outline and I immediately went, oh my God, that's where I know her from.
Yep. I did the reverse, actually. When we watched The Freshman at the start of season 4 of Buffering, I was like, why do I know? Or maybe I didn't even clock that I knew her, but I think we reached out to her to try to do an interview. And when I looked her up, I was like, what? Like, it was like brain explosions.
Right. Yeah. And I also just love it whenever we can bring Buffy connections to PCD. Like we used to try and do it intentionally on every episode, and we've kind of fallen away from it. But I love it when they organically happen.
Yeah, you knew they would happen if you brought me on.
Of course. Absolutely. I mean, if anything else, you were my Buffy connection to this one. So
that's true.
All right. Well, is there anything else that we need to talk about? But I'm a cheerleader.
Oh, God. Maybe just, I mean, there's so many things, listen, but I do think that it's nice that they end, that sort of like the last clip is just like a little tag on the end with her dad, Peter, that's also my dad's name, no big deal. That Peter going into a PFLAG meeting, basically, back when PFLAG stood for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. It no longer stands for that. Little known fact. It's just PFLAG. It doesn't stand for anything.
Okay.
Yeah, because obviously, like, lesbians and gays is not really the way that, like, we self-refer or even refer outside to our community.
Right.
So PFLAG is, like, just PFLAG now. But back in 1999, 2000, it was Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And you see the banner up behind, and he's like, my daughter is a homosexual. And it's really sweet. It's nice because, you know, it's very clear that Graham's family is not coming around. That Graham has lost a lot in making the decision to go with Meghan, right? Graham has lost her trust fund, her family, her basically everything she's ever known to be true, and also every support that she had, she's lost. And you think that Meghan has lost that too, because they say if you're gay, don't come back home again. But we find out right at the little tail end here that Meghan's parents have journeyed a little closer to her, which is nice.
Well, her dad did. Her mom showed up, but she was like in sunglasses and a scarf and like hiding.
You got to give her credit. Listen, you got to give her credit. I, as we talked about at the top of the episode, wrote a book called This is a Book for Parents of Gay Kids. And I toured with the book when it first came out in 2014. And I did an event on Long Island. I will never forget it as long as I live. I had there was, I don't know, say 40 people in the audience or what have you. And at the end, we did a Q&A. And there was a dude who raised his hand and asked a question that was sort of the question. I can't remember like how he phrased it, but it was basically like, we don't like gay people, but our kid is gay. So can you help us? And I was like, this is the most, I'm from Long Island. A lot of my family's from Long Island. I was like, this is the most Long Island shit I've ever seen in my life. That these people came to my event. This is a book for parents of gay kids because they want to help their kid and they want to get help, but they can't. They're just like, I hate gay people. Can you help me? But what ties it to this moment in the PFLAG group is that the mother and the father, they were there together, but they sat separately because and eventually as we talked with them, they sort of like were looking at each other and then were like eventually just kind of like gave up the ruse. But it was very apparent that like the mom knew that the dad was going to ask a question and she didn't feel ready to be identified at that moment as like the parent of somebody. So, it's just real. And like, I think that despite her mom being there in like a hat trying to hide, like I think she still deserves the credit because her butt is in that seat and she's taking the first step.
Okay. Yeah. She is there. She showed up. So she's trying to be supportive.
Yeah.
She's trying to learn how to be supportive.
Yes.
At least. Okay.
And we said exactly
Fair
the same
enough.
thing at the end of Saved with the pastor trying to reconcile sex before marriage and keeping this child and all this. He wasn't quite sure of it, but he was taking the step towards getting there. And we gave him credit for that.
Yeah.
So.
Baby steps.
All right.
Okay. If you would like to join the conversation, you can use the hashtag PCDeprived on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram at Eloquent Gushing, and you can drop us an email to podcast@eloquentgushing.com or leave us a voice message on speakpipe.com/eloquentgushing. Kristin, it has been amazing having you here, so thank you so much for coming on and joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hope that I didn't talk too much. I'm, as you can tell, very enamored with this film.
Oh, you liked it?
So I know. Yeah, I talked a lot, but I do love it very, very much.
We love hearing when people love something so much. That's really, really great. Are there other films you can recommend to someone as pop culture deprived as Mandy that she should go and seek out to watch?
Well, okay, so I'm going to get in trouble, I think, for recommending this. The people who are like listening to this episode who are deep into the zeitgeist of queer cinema will probably ream me. But for me, the two most like touchstone-y queer movies that I watched as a young person in this vein were But I'm a Cheerleader and Lost and Delirious, which is a movie that has Piper Perabo and actually Misha Barton randomly. She's like 12 or something in the movie. It is... I'm going to just say, like, I don't know that it's a high quality film, but it is really intense and I think worth a watch. There's a falcon, the main starring role played by a falcon. I won't tell you anymore, but I do feel that it goes hand in hand if you're taking the Kristin Russo 1990s, early 2000s queer movie train.
101.
That would be your next. Yeah, that would be your next viewing. So I'm sorry and you're welcome.
I have never even heard of it, so I will absolutely look it up. At the very least, I will look it up. How about that?
Okay, great.
Awesome. And if people do want to go and find you and your work, where are they able to find you?
Well, you can find a whole bunch of things that I do by going to my website, KristinNoeline.com. That is KristinNoeline.com. That's also my Twitter account and my Instagram handle. Buffering the Vampire Slayer is at BufferingCast. And then right now, I'm actually in about, I don't know when this will go up, but I will be partway through a Kickstarter for the Boiler Room. We're just raising some funds there. Joanna Robinson and I are going to be hosting it. And that can all be found at theboilerroomcast.com. And you can follow our socials over there at The Boiler Room. So various places depending on your interests.
Awesome. Cannot wait.
That's really exciting. Yeah, I've had some folks in our circles talk about maybe doing either like a live tweet of My So Cold Life and rewatching it, or even trying to do a podcast, but nobody's ever done it. So I'm really excited that you are.
I'm here for you. I'm going to do it. Yeah. Have you seen it? Have you guys seen?
I have. I don't know that I watched all of it. I remember when it was on, like, originally, like when it was on live. I remember watching it, and I loved Rayanne.
Same.
I hated Angela, and I think it's because I was her.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to be Rayanne so badly, but I don't actually remember any of the plot.
You will enjoy coming through it again, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be
and I will be your voice, Mandy, because I am the same. I was obsessed with Rayanne and wanted nothing to do with Angela, and that was entirely because I was fully an Angela.
Yeah. Yeah, same. All right. Well, Pop Culturally Deprived is 100% funded by listeners like you through our Patreon page. Any amount you can give, even just $1 a month, will give you access to exclusive content and also help support our network and develop new shows. To find out more, visit patreon.com/eloquentgushing. We'll be back next week with another episode where we'll talk about Star Trek V. Until then, I'm Mandy Kay.
And you are who you are. The only trick is not getting caught.
Pop Culturally Deprived is an Eloquent Gushing production. For more information, please visit eloquentgushing.com.